driving in Vietnam? Should you have a car or should you drive a motorbike? So let's talk about what the actual disadvantages and the benefits are of actually driving a car out here in Vietnam. And with those benefits, we'll really see why the motorbike is such a popular option. So let's get into it. Locals typically get their driver's licenses from the dealership they buy the car from, or they just skip the dealership and just pay a fee. Now, there are driving tests. I have friends that have went through the driving test to get a car driver's license. It's just, unfortunately, it's not enforced. So, with that being said, that's going to explain a lot of chaos that goes on when it comes to driving in Vietnam. The chaos out here is just out of control. It's almost like you give a bunch of 5-year-olds a car. The traffic jams are all day. Even in Saigon, if you wake up, you get on your motorbike, you go to work, it could take you 15, 20 minutes. But that same exact ride in a car could take up to 2 hours. You're constantly dealing with traffic jams. They just never end. Imagine LA traffic pretty much 18 hours a day. And on top of that, cars love to honk. There's this idea in the West where if you have a big truck that's lifted, then you have a small PP, right? In Vietnam, there's this same kind of mentality. If you have a car, you're richer, you're better than everybody else. So you are going to constantly deal with aggressive car drivers, aggressive bus drivers, aggressive truck drivers that are constantly honking and running, pretty much running you over to get you off the roads because they want to pass you. But in general, when it comes to honking in Vietnam, it's more of get the F out of my way than it is actually a safety precaution, which is quite unfortunate because I've seen a lot of accidents in Vietnam that have been related to bikes, buses, and cars. And you'll see right before the accidents, they're honking, but nobody cares. Why? Because the honking system in Vietnam is completely abused. When you honk so much, you pretty much become deaf to it. So if there's a real reason to honk, as you should, nobody cares. It's really just ignored because it's just another person honking. Now, when it comes to the actual infrastructure of Vietnam, this is a serious problem, especially in bigger cities like Saigon and Hanoi, where the people can afford the cars. Now, understand, to buy a car in Vietnam is expensive. If you have a Toyota Camry out there, $20,000. To buy that in Vietnam is going to cost you between $45,000 to $60,000. There is so many taxes on buying a car out here. And that money typically doesn't go to infrastructure either. And that's what brings us to infrastructure. There's not a lot of places to drive a car comfortably. The roads are quite small. When you're in big cities like Saigon or Hanoi, most of the roads are alleys. Most of them are barely wide enough. This is where a big problem happens a lot. And I've seen this more in Hanoi than Saigon. But a lot of taxi cars will try to drive through these smaller roads and alleys to take a shortcut. But what ends up happening is they create these traffic jams. They create these problems because these small roads that barely can fit 3 bikes across. So it turns into just constant gridlock, constant honking. So this is a huge problem. Now, places like Saigon, I've noticed this a lot. They're starting to create a lot of overpasses that allow cars and motorbikes to drive over a lot of these roads. So it's starting to create a little more free flow for the actual cars to drive around in some of these cities. When it comes to the countryside, though, I will say it is a lot better. Most people in these smaller towns, Phan Thiet, Dalat, etc., they can't afford these cars. They're way too expensive. If you have a car in Phan Thiet or Dalat, you're going to have a pretty good driving experience. It's not bad at all. Now, if you are driving across town, let's say you want to leave Saigon and go to like Phan Thiet. I think that's a great example because a lot of people like to go to Phan Thiet. It's a big beach city. If you want to drive there, you have 2 ways. One, you could drive through all these different cities, which is a horrible idea because you're going to be passing through a lot of small towns, going through a lot of traffic jams, fighting bikes, fighting police, yada, yada, yada. So what is your solution? Take the highway. Vietnam has an awesome highway situation going on. But the problem with these highways is they have tolls. Every time you leave a Providence area, you have to pay a toll. These tolls can vary. If it's within Saigon, let's say Saigon to Bin Hoi, it typically runs 60 to 90K. This might have changed. It's been like 5 years since I've been on that highway. Going to Phan Thiet, like I said before, when I used to drive that distance from Phan Thiet to Saigon, we had to pass between 5 to 7 tolls, depending on which route we took, which ranged between $5 to $7 per toll. So you're looking at like $45 to $50, which is about 200 to 600,000 Vietnamese dong as of right now, to drive your car through all this stuff. Now, here's the counterpart of this. Take a sleeper bus. Take a normal van, like a VIP van, that they call them. This typically takes 2 to 3 hours. You don't have to worry about the police pulling you over. A lot of these vans actually get on this highway, so they pay the toll. You don't pay the toll. It is legitimately cheaper to take that van, pay for a hotel for a couple of days, pay for your food for those 2 days, and take a van back to Saigon than it is to drive a car from Saigon to Frontier. If you're driving from city to city, you're going to be paying a lot of random toll fees, and these are things that you cannot avoid. So Vietnam does have an awesome infrastructure when it comes to the highway process, but it's just overly expensive to use this. On a good note, it's always empty. No matter what time of the day, the highways are always empty. You can always go the speed limit, which is 120 kilometers an hour, because most people don't want to pay all those tolls. And a big benefit of taking a highway is the police don't mess with you. I've talked about this before. Police love to pull over cars. They love to. And it's quite common to have the rule of the day. Every car will just get pulled over for the same exact reason. Like, you're not using a blinker while you're driving straight or stuff like that. And Vietnam has this weird idea. If you turn left, use your left blinker. You turn right, you lose your right blinker. If you're going to go straight, you turn your hazard lights on because they negate. See, doesn't make sense, right? But you will actually get pulled over for crossing an intersection, not having your hazard lights on. I don't get it either. I mean, whatever. But it is very common to deal with this stuff. If you're on a highway, you don't deal with police for the most part. But typically, if you're on a highway, you can pay all these tolls and avoid the police altogether. But if you do decide to drive through the city, let's talk about something that happens a lot that kind of frustrates a lot of people at the same time, and that is dealing with traffic itself. When you're driving through a city, you're dealing with motorbikes. These motorbikes will notoriously hit you, and they don't care. They won't even look at you. They'll hit your car while they're looking at their phone driving, and they'll just like look up and be like, oh, I hit somebody. They'll go around you. If your car gets damaged, usually not going to get compensated for this. Your insurance for your car in Vietnam doesn't cover this. Motorbikes typically don't have the insurance that covers damage to other people unless it involves death. So your car is prone to get damaged. A lot of people have to park their cars all over the place, and we'll talk about parking here in a minute. But because they have to park their cars in public areas all the time, it is very common to see cars get keyed, broken, damage to them, broken windows, tires jacked. Like, a lot of weird stuff happens to these cars. So if you do drive a car, you're going to experience a lot of external damages that honestly, you just have to suck it up. Now, going back a bit, when it comes to parking, there is really no good parking unless you have a house with enough room to put a car into it and you have like a gate to kind of block your house off. There's not a lot of places to park because a lot of people live in these smaller alleys, and that's pretty much most of Saigon. You don't have anywhere to put a car, so a lot of people have to park on the main roads, which leaves their car open to the elements of Vietnamese and weather, trash collectors, all these people that will damage your car without the intent of wanting to do it. But if they do, it's more of like, it's not mine, I don't care. They carry on about their day. So parking is really hard with that. And when it comes to like going downtown and parking at a mall or a bank or in public areas, it's overly expensive. I used to have a car when I was up north, and we used to go to the Starbucks. To park at the Starbucks was $5. Park a bike was free. And this is the same with tolls. There's a lot of small tolls that you'll drive through where there's a fee for a car, or a motorbike can drive through the side of it for free. So there's just always a fee when it comes to the car. It's like it's almost more expensive to drive the car than it is actually to own and buy the car. When it comes to the parking, good luck. There's not a lot of it when it comes to the city life at all. And most people, again, that can afford a car live in the city. Now, if you do buy a car, you decide to sell it. You just don't want it no more, right? This is where things get bad. Now, the tax in Vietnam is between 50 to 100% for the car. This is why they're so expensive. When you transfer a title, this is something I learned from first-person experience. When you transfer your title from your name to another person, you get taxed for transferring the title, and the new owner gets taxed for accepting the title. So there's almost a double tax. I don't know if they've changed this. It's been like 6 or 7 years since I've done this. And also the value of a car in Vietnam goes down drastically. Understand, we talked about a Toyota Camry. Costs $20,000 in the West. In Vietnam, you pay like $60,000 hypothetically. When you sell that car, you're selling it for the $20,000, not the $60,000. You can't resell tax. So when it comes to resell, it's really hard, man. It's just almost impossible to get any money back from it. So if you're buying cars, expect to pretty much lose like 90% of the value immediately. So buying a car, I don't think is a smart thing. If you really need a car, and we'll talk about a solution to it here in a bit, but if you really need to get a car, just rent it for the day. But even renting a car is crazy because, again, if the car gets damaged by a motorbike, the insurance doesn't cover it. The rental insurance typically is garbage, and they microcheck all the fenders and stuff like that. So if there's any scratches, they're like, "Oh, you have to pay for the insurance fee," and the insurance fee doesn't even cover anything. I think that kind of covers it today. So should you buy a car in Vietnam? I would say no. If you really need a car, rent a car. And really, wherever you're going in Vietnam, if it's for a trip, a family trip, if you live out here, you got kids, stuff like that, just rent a private van. Like you can get a private van from Saigon to Phan Dien. I think it's something like $50 to $70, and you'll get your own personal van with like 8 seats, or you get a taxi, and they will take you there directly. You don't have to worry about nothing. They'll go through the highway. It'll be the fastest way possible, and you don't have to worry about other people on a bus. But renting a car, it just doesn't have anything. You're dealing with the tolls. You're dealing with motorbikes hitting your thing. You're dealing with police attacking you. You're dealing with parking fees everywhere. You're dealing with so many costs. It's ridiculous. And I know a lot of you guys might be thinking about the traffic side. Like, well, if you just follow the rules, you wouldn't get pulled over. You wouldn't deal with a lot of these problems. If you have a car, you're rich. Like, literally, you are considered rich and you will be hassled. A lot of people that own a car are not rich. They spend all the money they have to buy this car. They get a loan to cover the rest. And a lot of people will actually allow other companies to put their logo on the car to help subsidize some of their monthly payments. They don't buy it for practicality. They buy it for a status symbol. So if you need a car, rent it. If you must, really do the math. Are you going to drive that car every day? And if you're in the city, why would you do that? Because you're going to waste 3 to 4 hours a week just on traffic jams. Get a motorbike. There's no reason to buy a car. If I'm wrong, let me know below why you would actually buy a car in Vietnam. I just don't see the reason, unless you're living in like Dalat or Phan Dien or just a small village area. There's truly no reason. And even then, what benefit would you see having a car in Dalat or Phan Dien that a motorbike could do? Bikes are cheaper, licenses are easier, police typically don't bother you. You can get A to B for pennies on the dollar. There's no tolls, there's no extra access fees, there's typically no parking fees. There is truly no benefit to owning a car in Vietnam unless you're trying to impress people that don't care about you.